Beginning in 235 AD, the Roman Empire enters the age of the Barracks Emperors, men made emperor not in Rome, but by soldiers in distant frontier camps. Between AD 235 and 259, the imperial title is seized more than a dozen times, not in Rome, but on the Rhine and the Danube in Africa, and in the east in front of assembled troops. Some reign for years, others last only weeks. Many are killed by the very soldiers who just hailed them. One of them is only 13. The pattern repeats, simple and brutal. An army removes the sitting emperor, proclaims its commander, and presents the rest of the empire with a done deal. These aren't isolated coups. This is a system, one that produces emperors and usurpers in rapid succession. Who survives this spiral? Can Rome find stability again, and at what price? In March 235, on the Rhine frontier near Mogontiacum, today's Mainz, Emperor Severus Alexander is killed by his own soldiers, along with his mother, Julia Mammania. In the same camp, the legions proclaim Maximinus Thrax emperor. The succession happens without formal institutions, without consultation with Rome, without political mediation. Power changes hands in the field by acclamation, by the army's decision. Maximinus controls one of the largest concentrations of troops in the empire. In Upper Germany, between the Rhine and the Danube, he commands more than 60,000 soldiers, roughly a fifth of Rome's entire army, under a single leader. That's what makes his elevation instantly credible. When the news reaches Rome, the Senate has no real alternative. Without an army of its own, it accepts the choice the troops have made. It recognizes Maximinus, but distrusts him deeply, and in 238 declares him a public enemy. From that point on, the center of power shifts to the frontier. Between 235 and 236, Maximinus stays with the army and rules from the borderlands. He campaigns against the Alemanni, the Chatti, and other Germanic tribes on the Rhine, basing his legitimacy on one principle: as long as the army fights and gets paid, the emperor survives. He seeks no approval in Rome and strikes no bargains with the aristocracy. With no political base in the capital, Maximinus has only one source of legitimacy: the army's loyalty. Keeping it requires regular pay, donatives, and constant campaigning, and that demands money now. So he increases the tax burden on some of the empire's richest provinces: proconsular Africa, Asia, and Achaia, far from the frontier, but essential to state revenue. In Rome, the emperor seems increasingly distant. On the frontier, he isn't a politician at all. He's a commander, leading men and handing out rewards.
Did you know that most people who watch our documentaries aren't subscribed yet? If you enjoy animated maps and history, join our community. Leave a like and subscribe so you never miss the next episodes.
In 238, the entire system explodes into view, suddenly visible, simultaneous, and uncontrollable. Opposition to Maximinus breaks out far from the Rhine, in one of Rome's richest provinces, proconsular Africa. The revolt begins at Thysdrus, then quickly spreads to Carthage. Local elites, squeezed by tax pressure, proclaim Gordian I and Gordian II co-emperors, not out of ideology, but out of necessity. The father, elderly and respected, brings senatorial legitimacy. The son provides continuity. It's an attempt to present the Senate with a ready-made government before Maximinus can react. But the African revolt collapses within weeks. Capellianus, governor of Numidia and commander of Legio III Augusta, remains loyal to Maximinus and marches on Carthage. Gordian II dies in the first clash. When the news reaches him, Gordian I takes his own life. In Rome, the Senate intervenes directly. Realizing Maximinus can no longer be ignored or removed by traditional politics, it appoints two Augusti, Pupienus and Balbinus, in a last-ditch attempt to set the authority of the capital against the power of the frontier armies. Under pressure from the streets, it also accepts the very young Gordian III as Caesar. Maximinus responds the only way he knows how, with the army. He marches into Italy and lays siege to Aquileia, the gateway to the peninsula. But here, the machine jams. The siege drags on. Supplies thin out. Confidence wavers. In the spring, Maximinus and his son are killed by their own soldiers in camp. Their bodies are beheaded, and the heads are sent to Rome as proof the regime is over. A brutal gesture, but politically unmistakable. Back in Rome, the power-sharing arrangement between Pupienus and Balbinus collapses within weeks. The two men distrust each other and paralyze the government. The Praetorian Guard, hostile to the Senate and never truly loyal to either emperor, exploits the split. The guards seize them, drag them away, torture them, and kill them. Their mutilated bodies are displayed in public as a message. In Rome, power belongs to whoever controls the weapons. With the Praetorians and the crowd behind him, the Senate proclaims Gordian III emperor, the grandson of Gordian I, and the last remaining piece of the Gordian faction. Gordian III is only 13, and that is precisely why he becomes a compromise. He suits the Senate because he commands no personal army. He suits the Praetorians because he can be controlled. And he suits the frontier commanders because he poses no immediate threat to any of them. He isn't chosen for strength, but because at that moment, no one has a real incentive to remove him. In just a few months, the empire has seen 6 emperors rise, and none has managed to build a stable government. By late 241, Gordian III leaves Rome and heads east. It isn't a political choice, it's a military necessity. In Syria, along the Euphrates, and in Mesopotamia, the young emperor's credibility will be tested. The headquarters shifts to Antioch, the logistical hub of the Eastern Empire. From there, operations begin against the Sasanian realm of Shapur I, an aggressive opponent able to strike deep into Roman territory. Gordian doesn't direct the campaign himself. He stays at the front as a political guarantee, a visible emperor for the troops and for the Senate. Real command lies with the Praetorian prefect Timotheus, Gordian's father-in-law and the key figure driving the war effort. Once again, the empire is governed through delegation. In 243, the Roman army wins a significant victory at Rassena in Mesopotamia. It matters, but it doesn't stabilize the frontier or remove the Sasanian threat. The distances remain vast, supply lines fragile, and the balance still precarious. In 244, after Timotheus dies, Gordian III dies as well, during a withdrawal along the Euphrates in disputed circumstances. Sources disagree on the details, but the political effect is immediate. Philip the Arab, now Praetorian prefect and the key figure in the chain of command, is proclaimed emperor by the troops. The frontier cannot be left without a leader. There's no time for a power vacuum. In wartime, succession has to be immediate. In 244, Philip the Arab returns from the frontier to Rome and tries to restore order at home. In 248, Rome celebrates its 1000th anniversary. It's propaganda in its purest form. Games, ceremonies, and above all, commemorative coins. messages meant to project continuity and control. But on the frontiers, the reality is the opposite. Emergencies, raids, and constant reaction. In those same years, usurpers appear on the Danube and in the east, Pacatianus and Iotapianus. Hailed by local armies, their rule is brief. They last weeks, and they are removed by the same troops that raised them. The system is already slipping out of control. In 249, Philip sends Decius to restore order on the Danube. Yet it is there that the army acclaims Decius instead. Decius marches on Italy and defeats Philip near Verona. The new emperor tries to hold the state together through discipline. In 250, Decius orders public sacrifices to the traditional gods. It wasn't aimed at one group alone. It was meant as a public test of loyalty inside a crisis-stricken empire. In Egypt, papyri preserve the libellae, written certificates proving that a citizen had performed the sacrifice when officials demanded proof. But the frontier sets the pace. Between 250 and 251, large Gothic groups cross the lower Danube. In 251, at Arbritus in Lower Moesia, the Roman army suffers a disaster. Decius and his son Herennius Etruscus die. It is one of the rare cases of an emperor falling in battle against an external army, a massive political and psychological blow. After Decius dies at Abritus, troops along the lower Danube and Moesia proclaim Trebonius Gallus emperor. In Rome, however, Hostilian, Decius' son, remains. He had already been named Caesar and is now associated with power, probably as Augustus, to preserve dynastic continuity and calm the Senate. A few months later, Hostilian dies in Rome, likely from the plague. His death removes the last direct representative of Decius' dynasty and leaves Trebonianus Gallus as sole emperor. Gallus then elevates his own son, Volusian, as co-ruler. The regime remains fragile. In 253, Commander Alemannius, acclaimed emperor by the troops after a victory over the Goths on the Danube, marches into Italy. As he advances, Gallus' own soldiers kill Gallus and Volusian before the armies even meet, and switch to Aemilianus' side. But Aemilianus' power is short-lived. Valerian advances from the west, already proclaimed emperor by his troops in the Rhine-Danube regions. When it becomes clear that Valerian's army is larger and better organized, Aemilianus' soldiers abandon him, kill him, and proclaim Valerian emperor before a decisive clash. Behind all of this, another factor magnifies the crisis, the so-called Plague of Cyprian. Some sources speak of thousands dying each day in Rome for weeks at a time, and many historians argue the demographic impact was devastating, possibly over 10% of the population in parts of the empire. 253 shows one thing clearly. With multiple fronts and overlapping crises, the throne changes hands at the speed of events themselves. By late 253, power looks consolidated again, but only on the surface. Valerian is recognized as emperor by the Western armies and quickly elevates his son Gallienus as co-emperor. 2 Augusti. It's a rational division of labor, not a guarantee of stability. Valerian takes the east, Gallienus remains in the west. In the west, Gallienus must hold a long, porous frontier. Pressure from Germanic peoples is constant on the Rhine. Instability on the Danube does not end after Abritus. Every troop movement solves one emergency and creates another. Reinforce one sector and you weaken the next. It's a balance maintained only through rapid interventions over and over. In the east, Valerian shifts his headquarters to Syria using Antioch as his hub and focuses on the Euphrates corridor. His opponent is Shapur I. After years of raids and campaigning, the frontier now demands the emperor's personal presence and massive resources. Meanwhile, proclamations on the Danube do not stop. Between 258 and 259, the death of the young Valerian II, named Caesar by his father Gallienus, and tensions in the Balkan provinces fuel new local claimants. Figures like Longinus and Regulianus rise briefly and are eliminated, but they reveal how fragile the chain of command has become. By late 259, the two Augusti are still standing, but they have not solved the underlying problem. They have only split the crisis across two fronts. By late 259, the decisive front is in the east. Valerian concentrates his forces in Syria, with Antioch as his base, and pushes along the Euphrates toward Roman Mesopotamia. The goal is to stop Shapur I before Persian pressure turns frontier cities into breaking points. Distances are immense, supply lines fragile, and the army already carries years of campaigning. Losses, exhaustion, disease. Every option is risky. Advance and you expose yourself. Halt and you concede the initiative. Negotiate openly and the troops may read it as weakness. In early 260, Valerian reaches the region around Edessa and Osroene with an army that has to act fast. And Rome is about to learn just how vulnerable an emperor can be when war closes in. Early in AD 260, near Edessa in Osroene, the Roman Empire gathers one of the last major field armies it can still assemble in the east. Emperor Valerian is there with tens of thousands of men. Some estimates put the force near 70,000, concentrated along the main route between Syria and Mesopotamia. It's a formidable army, but it's already worn down. Months of marching along the middle Euphrates have taken their toll, and everything depends on a supply line stretching hundreds of miles. Worse, an epidemic tears through the camps, often associated with the plague of Cyprian, killing without battle, not only soldiers, but also pack animals and the workers who keep the convoys moving. Day by day, the army thins. Facing them is Shapur I and the Sasanian army, more maneuverable, with heavy cavalry and horse archers able to strike fast at the enemy's weak points. Edessa isn't an imperial capital, it's a hinge point. If it falls, Persian pressure rolls straight into Syria. If it holds, Rome's eastern defenses stay connected. And here, something happens that had never happened before in Roman history. Valerian, a reigning Augustus, is taken alive and held prisoner by a foreign enemy. He isn't killed in battle. He isn't overthrown by his men. He isn't assassinated in Rome. Nothing like it will happen again to a reigning emperor of imperial Rome. How was it possible? And what happened next? By late 259, the Eastern Front isn't just another border. It's where Rome risks losing nearly 6 decades of hard-won ground beyond the Euphrates. Since the days of Septimus Severus, the empire hasn't merely guarded the river. It has built a bridgehead in Mesopotamia, anchored by fortress cities like Nisblis, Sangara, and Carrhae. Even Osroene, once a client kingdom, has only recently been turned into a Roman province. It's a recent conquest, fragile and never fully absorbed. The heart of the system is Antioch on the Orontes, not a minor provincial capital, but a metropolis of hundreds of thousands, one of the empire's great cities and the seat of Eastern military command. Men, money, and grain converge here. From Antioch, orders and supplies move along the main Euphrates supply route. If Antioch holds, the East holds. If the logistical chain linking Antioch to Mesopotamia breaks, the defense collapses. On the ground, 6 or 7 legions operate, around 30,000 to 35,000 legionnaires, supported by at least as many auxiliaries, Syrian archers, cavalry, and light infantry. Units like Legio III Gallica, veterans of Eastern warfare, are among them, along with the so-called Parthian legions stationed beyond the river. River flotillas and transport craft on the Euphrates help move men and supplies, but they aren't enough on their own to stop a major Persian offensive. And Edessa sits near the center of it all, a key crossroads roughly 185 miles from Antioch, where the Roman world meets the interior of Mesopotamia. Shapur is targeting this entire structure. Valerian understands the logic. If he doesn't stop the Persians along the Antioch-Euphrates-Osroene route, the frontier cities become weak links. Strategically, he has no choice. Valerian moves because the warning signs in the east have been building for years. Sasanian offensives have already struck deep. Antioch itself has been threatened and even sacked. Then, in 259, reports come in of new pressure on the fortress belt of Mesopotamia and Osroene. If the enemy breaks into the corridor between the Euphrates and the uplands, the frontier won't hold. Valerian's goal is straightforward: concentrate an army, protect the major Euphrates crossings, and keep Shapur from choosing the time and place of battle at will. The line he has to defend runs from Syria to the river crossings. Fords and pontoon bridges around places like Zuguma and Samosata, then bends northeast towards Osroene and Edessa. This is where war becomes logistics. Even without a precise headcount, we're talking about tens of thousands of men. Each soldier needs roughly 2 pounds of grain a day. Multiply that across an army of 50,000, and you're moving something like 50 tons of grain every single day. And that's before you feed the horses and pack animals. You won't carry weeks' worth of supplies on wagons. You depend on depots, requisitioning, and towns along the route. If one link fails, the army slows. And a slow army on this front is a vulnerable army. The sources don't let us reconstruct every step of the march, but one thing is clear: disease is eating into the force. In these same years, the empire is hit by the epidemic known as the Plague of Cyprian, and it very likely affects Valerian's army as well. Fevers thin the ranks, sap strength, and slow movement. Under those conditions, the Roman army marches toward its showdown. When Valerian enters Edessa in 260, he faces Shapur I, the ruler who has turned the Sasanians into a true imperial power. Shapur follows Ardashir I, founder of the dynasty, first as co-ruler around 240, then as sole king from 242. By 260, he has been on the throne for close to 2 decades. His ambition is clear: secure Sasanian Mesopotamia and press the frontier west, claiming the title King of Kings, not just over Iran, but over conquered lands as well. Rome has already paid for that strategy. In earlier years, Shapur inflicted major defeats along the Euphrates, at places like Barbalissos, and struck important cities, including Antioch itself, deep inside Syria. In 256, Dira Europos falls, not just a fortress lost, but proof that Rome's system on the Middle Euphrates can be broken. Edessa, in Osroene, is where Valerian tries to halt the Sasanian advance, at the edge of Rome's Mesopotamian bridgehead. The sources don't all agree on the decisive moment. Some describe a battle lost, others negotiations that went badly. But the outcome is certain. Valerian is captured alive and taken into captivity along with members of his staff. Shapur makes the moment public. He boasts of it in a celebratory inscription and immortalizes it in monumental art. The king on horseback, the Roman emperor helpless. The consequences are immediate. The Eastern Command is suddenly leaderless. The war goes on, but for the first time in Roman history, a reigning emperor cannot lead it because he is the enemy's prisoner. After Edessa, Valerian doesn't disappear. He is alive, but he is in the enemy's hands. Shapur takes him deep into Sasanian territory as a political trophy, proclaimed in inscriptions and depicted in monumental art. Along with the emperor, thousands of Romans, soldiers, technicians, and craftsmen are deported and used as forced labor. For Shapur, Edessa isn't only a battlefield victory. It's also a capture of manpower and expertise. That's why the blow is so devastating for Rome. It loses an emperor, an army, and critical skills all at once. In the West, Gallienus remains in power, but he can't simply march east to replace his father. Between northern Italy, the Rhine, and the Danube, the frontiers are stretched to the breaking point. In that vacuum, a new power emerges on the Rhine. In Lower Germany, the troops proclaim Postumus. The spark is a clash with Germanic raiders and a dispute over loot claimed by Caesar Salinius and his circle at Colonia Agrippina. The soldiers answer in the usual way. They choose a commander in the field. Postumus marches on Cologne. Salonius is killed. Within weeks, Gaul and long stretches of the Rhine frontier fall under a separate authority, one that works because it pays, defends, and decides on the spot. In the east, the vacuum produces another emergency regime. Macrianus and his sons emerge between Syria and Asia Minor, trying to return crisis command into a rival imperial alternative. It's fragile. One son, Quietus, stays in Syria. The other, along with Macrianus himself, tries to push west. But the response comes from the people who actually control the ground. And that is where Odenathus of Palmyra steps in. Palmyra, an oasis city between inland Syria and the Euphrates, has cavalry, wealth, and local networks. Odenathus drives the Persians back, crushes the eastern usurpation, and for now, becomes the backbone of Rome's defense in the east, pushing deep into Mesopotamia. From 262 onward, the empire's fragmentation hardens. On the Rhine, Postumus doesn't behave like a barbarian invader. He builds a breakaway Roman state using Roman tools. He rules from cities like Colonia Agrippina and, above all, Augusta Treverorum, Trier. He holds the frontier, mints coins, and builds his own administration. The choice is brutal but practical. He doesn't march on Rome because his legitimacy comes from the frontier and from pay. As long as he defends Gaul and the Rhine, his men follow. In the east, Odenathus does what Rome can no longer do directly. After settling accounts with Marcianus and his sons, he carries the war beyond the Euphrates. Between 262 and 263, he pushes forward and reaches the vicinity of Ctesiphon, enough to reverse the Sasanian momentum and turn Palmyra into the linchpin of Rome's defense in the east. Between those two poles stands Gallienus, facing a different problem: keeping Italy intact while the mobile frontiers consume resources. His focus shifts more and more on northern Italy, because from there he can react fast, whether the next emergency is a raid on the Rhine or a crisis on the Danube. In these years, Rome increasingly relies on a mobile reserve, especially cavalry that can race to whichever border is breaking. But the pressure doesn't cease. The Danube keeps producing emergencies, and the eastern Mediterranean sees new raids. Then, in 268, instability reaches the heart of the system. General Aureolus, one of the most important commanders in Gallienus' war machine, rebels in northern Italy. Gallienus lays siege to him at Mediolanum, and there, in camp, the emperor is assassinated. The lesson is grim. Once the empire splits into rival power centers, even Italy becomes a battlefield. And when Gallienus falls, who deserves power? Who can seize it without losing the Rhine, the Danube, and the East in the same year? In 268, after Gallienus is killed during the siege of Mediolanum, Danubian troops in northern Italy proclaim Claudius II emperor. The first priority is to end the civil conflict. Aureolus, barricaded in Milan, surrenders and is executed. But Claudius can't stay in Italy. The real crisis is already back on the Danube. In 269, the biggest threat of this phase arrives. A large Gothic and Scythian coalition pushes towards the Balkans, partly over land and partly by sea, from the Black Sea into the Aegean. Ancient sources give enormous numbers, almost certainly exaggerated. Thousands of ships. Hundreds of thousands of men.
Onward to Thrace! Let the Romans tremble!
What matters is the outcome. Thrace and Macedonia are overrun. Cities like Thessalonica are threatened, and Rome has to decide where to concentrate its forces. Claudius marches into Moesia. The decisive clash takes place near Naissus, today's Nice, along the route that links the lower Danube to the Balkan interior. The Roman victory is major and costly. The Gothic groups are shattered, but the aftermath creates a problem Rome struggles to manage. Survivors scatter, and huge numbers of prisoners and refugees keep moving through the region in search of food. Claudius earns the title Gothicus, but the empire doesn't regain stability. The crisis accelerates. In 270, Claudius dies, likely in the same epidemic climate. Quintillus is briefly recognized in Rome, but the Danube army chooses Aurelian. Within weeks, Quintillus is left without troops. Some sources say his soldiers kill him, others say he commits suicide. Either way, it's over almost immediately. The point isn't a twist, it's the rule. In an empire fighting on multiple fronts, succession doesn't wait for Rome. It's decided where the armies are. In AD 270, the Roman Empire is effectively split three ways. In the east, for the first time since Cleopatra, power isn't held by a Roman emperor, nor by a barracks general. It's in a woman's hands. In Palmyra, between Syria and the routes to the Euphrates, after Odenathus is murdered, command doesn't pass to a Roman officer. It passes to Zenobia, his wife, regent for her son Vabalithus, but ruler in practice. She isn't a makeshift usurper, a warrior queen who commands armies, takes territory, and challenges imperial authority, at times even claiming the title Augusta. Zenobia is also highly educated. She speaks several languages with ease, moves comfortably between Greek, Roman, and Eastern cultures, and, tradition says, even writes a treatise on Cleopatra, presenting herself as her ideal heir. Not vanity, politics. It's her way of claiming Palmyra is not merely a rebel province, but a world capable of ruling itself. While Aurelian struggles to stabilize Italy and the Danube, Palmyra starts making decisions for Syria, for Arabia, and then for an enormous prize: Egypt, Alexandria, grain, and the mint. Will Rome realize it has already lost in the east? Will Aurelian rise to Zenobia's challenge? To see how Zenobia can take command of Rome's eastern world, we have to go back to Palmyra around AD 267. After the shock of Edessa and years of emergency, the man holding the eastern front together is Odenathus, not a Roman emperor, but the local linchpin who coordinates defense and drives back Persian pressure, pushing as far as the gates of Ctesiphon. Then, suddenly, that linchpin disappears. Odenathus is murdered in Syria, along with an older son, in what sources describe as a court conspiracy. Some put it at a banquet, others name Maeonius as the killer, or the beneficiary. The details differ, but the effect is the same. In an instant, the East loses its on-the-ground coordinator. And in that vacuum, Zenobia, Odenathus' wife, steps forward. This is an internal transition, not a revolt. She takes control as regent for her son Vabalithus, still too young to rule. The move prevents internal fragmentation and preserves the formal order. It keeps taxes flowing and the chain of command intact, at least on paper. And Rome can't simply send a general to replace Palmyra. With Italy, the Danube, and Western crises, the imperial center lacks the ability to garrison Syria. By necessity, it accepts what works. But why can Palmyra carry this weight? Because it isn't a fringe outpost, it's a geographic hinge point. It sits between inland Syria and the routes to the Euphrates, close enough to major cities to intervene within days, yet far enough out to control the desert roads. The numbers make the map clear. Palmyra lies about 140 miles from Damascus and about 170 miles from Antioch along the main Syrian route. Toward the Euphrates, it's a little over 125 miles. It isn't an isolated city, it's a hub linking towns, fords, tracks, and supplies. Palmyra lives off transit. Its wealth depends on trade routes. It controls no port and no great river. It governs the traffic that crosses the desert and flows toward Emesa, Damascus, Antioch, and then the coast. And this isn't just legend. A customs tariff carved in stone, the Palmyrene tariff, dated to AD 137, shows a city accustomed to measuring, taxing, and regulating trade. It's a snapshot of a working fiscal system. In a world where a caravan convoy can cover about 16 to 19 miles a day, controlling a hub like this means controlling time. Who passes, when, and how much gets paid. That revenue pays for the most important part of power: armed men and equipment. That's where real authority lies. And in the desert, mobility and mounted units matter more than sheer numbers. Heavy cavalry, archers, and local networks that can protect the routes and strike quickly wherever the frontier shifts. Zenobia moves in this reality with one decisive advantage. She doesn't look like an outsider. Her dynasty adopts Roman forms and names, Septimia, and governs with recognizable tools: city administration, titles, institutional continuity. It looks Roman enough to be accepted publicly, but the substance remains local. Guarantee security, keep urban cities loyal, and keep money and supplies moving. So without spectacular proclamations, a new center of power takes shape between Palmyra, Emesa, and Antioch, an East that formerly speaks in Rome's name, but increasingly answers to whoever is on the ground and in control. And it's on this new normal, before the great conquests, that the Queen of Palmyra takes the next step. Zenobia no longer merely guards the frontier. She begins taking provinces in broad daylight, provinces that aren't periphery at all, but the empire's economic heart. Around AD 271, the kingdom of Palmyra makes a decisive leap. It no longer limits itself to controlling Syria, but annexes Egypt as well, a province that is not a frontier, but the empire's economic center. This is no sudden windfall. It is a deliberate strategic choice. The line of advance is straightforward. From Syria, the Palmyrene force moves south, crosses Palestine, passes through the Sinai, and reaches the Nile Delta, aiming at Alexandria. It isn't a vast mass. The latest estimates suggest roughly 10,000 to 20,000 men, a picked force made up mostly of Palmyrene heavy cavalry, archers, and mobile eastern units. It's an army built to move fast, not to besiege city after city. Zenobia stands at the center of the decision. Sources depict her as involved in military choices, and tradition places her on the scene at least in the operation's crucial phases. She pays the troops, keeps discipline, and guarantees continuity of command. In an age absent of emperors, presence in the field gives her power enormous legitimacy. The Roman prefect of Egypt, Tanagio Probus, tries to react, but the imbalance isn't only numerical, it's structural. Probus has no large field army concentrated in one place. In Egypt, forces are traditionally limited. Legionary detachments, auxiliary troops, and urban garrisons for a total of 5,000 to 10,000 men scattered along the Nile, across the Delta, and in the cities. He has to defend a vast territory while the enemy advances as a single column. The outcome is swift. Probus is defeated and dies. Sources disagree on how, but not the result. This is not a siege campaign. Once the prefect falls, some estimates suggest 80 to 90% of the cities involved go over to Palmyra without fighting. Taking Alexandria means the harbor, the mint, and above all, control of a crucial share of revenue and the grain that feeds Mediterranean cities. With Alexandria in its hands, Palmyra becomes a major economic power in the region. And in Egypt, there's a clear paper trail of the transfer of authority. In papyri, in administrative formulas, in official headings, and in dating systems. These documents tell us Egypt has changed masters. One figure captures the scale of the blow. Antioch and Alexandria lie about 500 miles apart as the crow flies. This isn't a province Rome can retake in a few weeks. That distance multiplies time, cost, and risk just when the empire has no margin to maneuver. With Alexandria taken, Zenobia faces a new problem. Syria and Egypt are two separate pieces. If someone cuts the strip between Palestine and the Sinai, Egypt is isolated. That's why, between 270 and 271, Palmyra focuses on securing territorial continuity. It has to be stitched together, or it breaks. To the south, Palmyra's columns consolidate Arabia along the routes that run from inland Syria down to Bostra, capital of Roman Arabia. That node matters for more than symbolism. It controls roads, toll points, and the passages between Syria and Roman Palestine. Holding Bostra and the caravan roads locks down the line linking Damascus and the Orontes Basin to the corridor leading toward Egypt. But the real strategic leap is to the north. From Syria, access to Asia Minor runs through Cilicia, a coastal plain that ends against the wall of the Taurus Mountains. The passes are few and unavoidable. The Cilician gates, and whoever controls them decides who can climb onto the Anatolian plateau and who stays trapped to the south. Palmyra pushes beyond Syria, seizing the passes and choke points that keep the road open between Antioch and Inner Anatolia. And if Palmyra holds the Taurus Gateway, any reconquest becomes costly. To enter Syria, you have to pass where Palmyra can shut the door. And when a power controls roads and passes, it can start calling itself an empire. After Egypt and the corridors into Anatolia, Zenobia understands the contest isn't fought only with armies and mountain passes. It's fought with something even more dangerous: legitimacy. For months, Palmyra stays in a gray zone. It effectively rules Syria, Arabia, and Egypt, yet can still present it all as management in the empire's name, a local power needed because Rome is not present. Then comes the turning point, not with a speech, but with titles. In official language, Babalithus, her son, rises step by step, from Rex to Imperator, and finally to Augustus. It's a way of bringing him, piece by piece, into the imperial rank itself. Alongside him appears Zenobia. On some coin issues and in official presentations, she is described as Augusta, a choice historians place between late 271 and 272 with disputed chronology, but with a meaning that is unmistakable. Here, the image of the second Cleopatra is born. Whether the lineage is true matters less than the message. After Egypt, invoking Cleopatra means saying this: Alexandria is not an occupied province, but a legitimate throne, and the East is no longer a loyal periphery, but a world capable of naming its own center of power. The break doesn't come with the proclamation. On Alexandrian coinage and in other official formulas, Babalithus takes the titles Imperator and Augustus and is paired with Zenobia as co-Augusta. Augustus isn't decorative. It's the Roman imperial title above all others. From this moment, Babalithus is no longer an extraordinary governor, but an alternative emperor, and Rome can no longer pretend nothing is happening. Aurelian comes to power in 270 and finds not just an empire in trouble, but one already distorted by crisis. In the West, he has to prevent collapse, frontiers, armies, legitimacy, because if the West gives way, Rome is no longer a credible capital. But while Aurelian stabilizes the Western emergency, in the East, the problem is now structural. A bloc controls Syria and Egypt, and above all, the corridors that link them to Anatolia through the Taurus passes. This is not a revolt. It is administration. It collects taxes, pays troops, assigns offices, and above all, it governs. This is the point of no return. If Rome waits any longer, it loses not only provinces, but the ability to decide in the East. Every month that goes by makes that system more stable and more accepted in the eyes of everyone. Aurelian understands it. In 272, he stops waiting. This rift cannot be mended with letters or compromises. The Roman army moves east in a full-scale campaign. It goes to confront a state that is already functioning with everything that entails. If you found this episode helpful, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. In the next video, we'll follow Aurelian east into the clash with Zenobia and the Palmyrene Empire.